Andy Johnson.
Thank you very much. It's marvellous to be here. I'd like to send out a big thanks to Anthony Beckett for organising this conference. It's something that's done at great expense and with great effort, so I hope everyone sitting here today will appreciate that. I wish it was a much fuller auditorium than it is. It's great to see so many new faces. I haven't really got much to add to the introduction that Frankie so excellently gave us. I just completely forgot in the mix of everything to set up my PC audio, so I'm hoping, I don't know if the PC audio is going to work because I've got some audio clips which I'm not sure if it's been fed through the audio system at the moment. I don't know if Frank, you could track down Anthony just to help me check that later. But what I'm going to talk about today is anti-gravity technology and my sort of research into that, which started in about 2004. Let's see if I can get this video clip to play.
A lot of people talk about conspiracies over a shadow government. I'm willing to testify before Congress that these black operations do exist. I nearly became part of it. But I saw the light, I think. Or was it? And I got out. And that's it. We have to disclose what we know. And I am willing to testify before Congress under oath, or before any other organization, that what I witnessed was true.
I have heard astounding things, not only from this colonel, okay, but also probably the highest rank was a retired 3-star general, lieutenant general in the Air Force. And he knew another guy that I was in contact with, and this other guy claims that he worked 7 years on the U.S. anti-gravity program. I have a fraction of what he told me, and I've got it tape recorded. It's true. Whoa. What a sham the space program is.
Basically, this clip is a chap called John Maynard talking about what are called black projects. Right? John Maynard was a Disclosure Project witness, as you can see the date there, at least the text is useful. And he said that he became aware that black projects were real. There really was a large amount of money being secretly spent on research projects. And he was prepared to testify before Congress or any other organisation that what he witnessed was true. This is a chap called William Hamilton, speaking in 1998. He's a very well-regarded UFO researcher, got in touch with a lot of people, and he claims that he talked to a general who worked for 7 years on the US anti-gravity program. And he basically says, if half of what this guy said was true, then things like the space shuttle were just a complete, scam, basically. But in the presentation, we're going to look at these basic questions. What is gravity? What is anti-gravity? And what evidence is there that technology other than conventional aerospace technology exists which could be thought of as being anti-gravity or something attempting to control gravity? We're going to look at some of the history of anti-gravity research, some of the research of Nick Cook, the Hutchison effect, which is very important in this, and I didn't realise how important until about 4 years after I first put this presentation together. Some anti-gravity experiments we're going to touch on, which have already been done. We're going to look at Coral Castle in Florida, and we're going to look at alleged black projects in the USA to an extent, sightings of flying triangles, and we're going to look at hints of new technology which have come from NASA if we have time. This is really a 2-hour presentation, so you're going to have to hang on to your hats because we're going to go through this at something of breakneck speed. Okay, so what is gravity? Let's start with that. Well, according to the Chambers CD-ROM Dictionary from 1996, gravity is the force of attraction that arises between objects by virtue of their masses. The force of gravity obeys an inverse square law. At twice a given distance, the force is only 1/4 as strong. Okay? That's what Newton said in whatever it was, 1638. I forget the exact date when he came out with Principia Mathematica. Now, that was revised about almost 300 years later with this fellow, everyone's heard of, I'm sure. And what he basically said, that gravity isn't a force of attraction as such, It arises as a result of the effect of the mass on space-time. Okay, so a planet's orbit around the Sun, as observed in three-dimensional space, arises from its natural trajectory in modified space-time. So there is no need for a force of gravity coming from the Sun and acting on the planets. And what was said at this time was that this explained oddities in the orbit of Mercury, which couldn't be explained by Newtonian gravitation. In other words, what Einstein essentially said was the orbit of Mercury had what's called the precession of the perihelion, which is something like, between two given years, you have about a disparity of about 10 miles in the orbit of Mercury. In other words, if you were to take the Newtonian laws and predict where Mercury should be, there's a disparity of about 10 miles in the orbit. And this was how accurate observational astronomy was by the 1900s. And so what Einstein said was that the energy coming off the Sun, as according to E equals mc squared, essentially acted like extra mass because there's an energy-mass equivalence. So this was said to explain orbits in the oddity of Mercury, orbital oddities in the orbit of Mercury. Now, the latest thing, of course, that many of you will have heard of, and a lot of people speak about, is string theory, which is meant to be a way to unify all the forces and explain them in terms of what are called strings. Now, string theory, M theory, says that the force of gravity is transmitted by gravitons, okay? And it's the particle that causes gravity. And there are 5 different formulations of string theory, the latest of which works in 11 dimensions, okay? It is probably unrelated, but Wilbert Smith, as I'll mention later on, if we get time, was told by people from outside that there are 12 dimensions of deity. So we're getting into this idea of dimensions already, looking at other dimensions. And I've got a video clip from Brian Greene.
It's been more than 300 years since Isaac Newton came up with the universal law of gravity, inspired, as the story goes, by seeing an apple fall from a tree. Today it seems obvious that gravity is a powerful force.
It would seem to most people that gravity is a very important force. It's very strong. It's very hard to get up in the morning, stand up. And when things fall, they break because gravity is strong. The fact of the matter is that it's not strong. It's really a very weak force.
Gravity pulls us down to the Earth and keeps our Earth in orbit around the Sun. But in fact, we overcome the force of gravity all the time. It's not that hard. Even with the gravity of the entire Earth pulling this apple downward, the muscles in my arm can easily overcome it. And it's not just our muscles that put gravity to shame. Magnets can do it too. No sweat. Magnets carry a different force, the electromagnetic force. That's the same force behind light and electricity. It turns out that electromagnetism is much, much stronger than gravity. Gravity, in comparison, is amazingly weak. How weak? The electromagnetic force is some 1,000 billion, 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 billion times stronger. That's a 1 with 39 zeros following it. The weakness of gravity has confounded scientists for decades. But now, with the radical world of string theory, filled with membranes and extra dimensions, there's a whole new way to look at the problem.
One way of approaching the question of why gravity is so weak compared to all the other forces is to turn the question completely on its head and say, no, actually gravity isn't very weak compared to all the other forces. It just appears to be weak.
It may be that gravity is actually just as strong as electromagnetism, but for some reason, we can't feel its strength.
Consider a pool table, a very large pool table. Think of the surface of the pool table as representing our three-dimensional universe, although it is just two-dimensional. And think of the billiard balls as representing atoms and other particles that the universe is made out of.
So here's the wild idea. The atoms and particles that make up stuff in the world around us will stay on our particular membrane, our slice of the universe, just as the billiard balls will stay on the surface of the pool table. Unless you're a really bad pool player. But whenever the balls collide, there is something that always seeps off the table. Sound waves. That's why I can hear the collision. Now, the idea is that gravity might be like the sound waves. It might not be confined to our membrane. It might be able to seep off our part of the universe. Or, think about it another way. Instead of pool tables, let's go back to bread. Imagine that our universe is like this slice of toast, and that you and me and all of matter, light itself, everything we see, is like jelly. Now, jelly can move freely on the surface of the toast, but otherwise it's stuck. It can't leave the surface itself. But what if gravity were different? What if gravity were more like cinnamon and sugar? Now, this stuff isn't sticky at all, so it easily slides right off the surface. But why would gravity be so different from everything else that we know of in the universe? Well, it turns out that string theory, or M theory, provides an answer. It all has to do with shape. For years, we concentrated on strings that were closed loops, like rubber bands. But after M theory, we turned our attention to other kinds. Now we think that everything we see around us, like matter and light, is made of open-ended strings. And the ends of each string are tied down to our three-dimensional membrane. But closed loops of string do exist. And one kind is responsible for gravity. It's called a graviton. With closed loops, there are no loose ends to tie down, so gravitons are free to escape into the other dimensions, diluting the strength of gravity and making it seem weaker than the other forces of nature. This suggests an intriguing possibility. If we do live on a membrane, and there are parallel universes on other membranes near us, we may never see them. But perhaps we could one day feel them.
And this was from a 2004 documentary about these, it's called Welcome to the 11th Dimension, all about string theory. What essentially he says in that clip is gravity is weak in comparison to the other forces of nature. String theory suggests then that gravity may be similar to the other forces. Part of its force acts in another dimension. So actually considering that we've got an extra dimensional component to gravity which we can't directly measure with any experimental equipment. Alternatively, it may be force leaking from another dimension into our own. This is actually what is spoken of in string theory. You can go and check this out if you wish. And this could account for it being difficult to measure the gravitational constant accurately, which is one of the things which is said in physics. Gravitational constant is 6.67 times 10 to the minus 11. And that's the G in Newton's equation. Though string theory seems to be the most popular as a way of explaining gravity, there is also another competing theory called loop quantum gravity. But it's all tied up in sort of, various sort of mathematical laws. It's very, very complicated, and only a few people in the world can understand it. Now, I think, from what I've read and from what other people have experienced, other people have done, which are not really talked about very much, that gravity is not what we think it is. So what is not an anti-gravity device or an anti-gravity device? What is not anti-gravity or an anti-gravity device, I should say? Well, I had an argument with somebody once. They'll say, well, a chair's an anti-gravity device. No, it's not an anti-gravity device. It doesn't change the local force of gravity or anything like that. It just merely resists the force of gravity when you're sitting on it. Okay, so a chair is not an anti-gravity device. A balloon is not an anti-gravity device. Okay, and that floats because of mass displacement, which is Archimedes' principle. A propeller or rocket engine is not an anti-gravity device. It works by displacing mass from one place to another, which is where you suck a large volume of air in at the front of the jet engine and eject it out of the back at high speed. An ion engine is not an anti-gravity device either. It works by mass displacement as well. It's just more efficient than sort of a jet engine or chemical rockets. Okay. So, none of those things are anti-gravity devices that I showed on that page. However, I believe that these things are, I would say, anti-gravity devices. Any device or method capable of changing the local gravitational field strength or having the effect of reducing an object's weight. Okay? There's no propellant involved. That's basically the difference. There's no propellant involved. And another term for anti-gravity might be gravity control. This is, some people don't like the phrase anti-gravity. So, general characteristics of anti-gravity devices and experiments which you see, if you look into this as I have, you'll see these sort of themes recurring. Devices spinning very quickly or having spinning components at high speed. This is one common thing that repeatedly comes up. Feeding in high voltages, for example, millions of volts or tens of thousands of volts. Electrogravitics, there's a whole field of research involved with that, which even NASA have sort of done some work in as well. Using strong magnetic fields as well, that's another thing which seems to be done quite regularly in these experiments, and that's called magnetogravitics. And high-frequency oscillations of electric current or magnetic fields, so you can combine them both. And that also seems to produce certain effects. When you do it at high enough frequency, when you get up to revolution speeds in excess of 20,000 revolutions per minute, that's when these effects start to come out. The clips I've got there at the bottom, the one on the left is a simulation of Gordon Cooper's sighting from 1955, where he took a film, his team filmed an object landing at Edwards Air Force Base. 3 legs came out and landed on the dry lake bed. They filmed it, and then it took off, and the film was classified, taken away, and it was never seen again. And that's from Gordon Cooper, Mercury astronaut, which is a whole other story in itself. So I'll have a look at a brief history of some of the anti-gravity research that's been done. So racing through this pretty quickly. Now, I think this may have even started in the early days of electric power, even as early as 1900. According to Nick Cook's research, which we're going to mention a few times here, there was discussion of the subject among various groups of scientists until about 1956, when it seemed to become the subject of ridicule and/or it went underground. And the thing I haven't put on the slide here is Project Winterhaven. People want to go and look up about Project Winterhaven. That seems to have been a watershed time. Up until that point, all the major aircraft companies, up until 1956, were doing serious research into anti-gravity technology, and then at that point went underground, and it was basically ridiculed from that point onwards. Now, 2 prominent names in this that come out are, of course, Nikola Tesla and Thomas Townsend Brown. Now, Tesla, of course, everyone knows about. He invented the AC current system, which powers everything here now. He also did a lot of other experiments. He also probably did the world's first X-ray photograph. Not a lot of people know that. Much of Marconi's work seems to have been based on some of Tesla's experiments, so it appears that Tesla may have even did what Marconi did before he did it. So on and on, we have a unit of magnetic flux, which is called the Tesla. That's about the only time you'll hear about Tesla in modern-day physics, really. You don't hear much about him. I'm not going to go into him much because there's a whole lot of other stuff that he got into, wireless transmission of power, radiant energy, all this sort of thing. But the other name that comes out, which is very interesting, was Townsend Brown. I'll just mention a bit more about Tesla. I think I've covered most of this slide. It's claimed that Tesla built and operated over Unity devices. That's the other thing that comes into this, which Frank Yamar mentioned in the introduction. Once you start to open up this technology, you begin to see there's a new energy source there, an energy source which doesn't involve fuel. Tesla called it radiant energy. So he was able to tap into this radiant energy, and you can even see reproductions of his experiments now. There's a YouTube channel called by a chap called Paulsness, where he has a fluorescent tube which he puts in a bowl of water, and then using Tesla's apparatus, he actually makes his tube illuminate in the bowl of water.
Sorry, what's his name again?
Paulsness, I think is his name. Paulness. I'm pretty sure that's his name. You can, if you just put Tesla radiant energy experiment or something like that into YouTube, you'll find something like that. Also, the Piers Arrow car, for example, from the 1930s that Tesla and one of his relatives were driving around at 90 miles an hour. FBI raided his apartment in 1943 following his death. He died penniless, basically, and lived in a hotel in New York in the last days of his life. So there's a whole story there about Tesla, which I'm not going to get into. Other people have done presentations about him. The chap that is more interesting in some ways in relation to anti-gravity is Thomas Townsend Brown. Now he never obtained a degree, so he didn't go through a mainstream university, but he did do a lot of experimental physics, and he spent time studying at several schools, including Caltech, Kenyon College, and Denison University. He's been called a physicist by some people, but I really think he was an electrical engineer. More than anything else, that was what he did. He served in the US Navy in the 1930s at the Naval Research Laboratory, funnily enough. So already you're getting the military connection in this. As I mentioned, Project Winterhaven, he was involved in that. And that was a research proposal to build an anti-gravity craft based on the work of Townsend Brown that he'd already completed in the years prior to that, starting in about 1920. Much of his work still seems to be kept under wraps, and his family keep a low public profile. I've got a letter written by him in 1985 where he basically says, somebody was writing to him asking about his research, and he said, can't really tell you much about it because a company have licensed it, so I'm not going to tell you anything. That's also all on the internet as well, of course. But the key thing that he did was he demonstrated that there seemed to be a link between gravity and electricity. He worked with Dr. Paul Beifeld, a friend of Albert Einstein, director of Swayze Observatory in Denison, Ohio. In 1923, they started to experiment with what are called gravitators. They found interaction between find something like that. Also, the Piers Arrow car, for example, from the 1930s that Tesla and one of his relatives were driving around at 90 miles an hour. FBI raided his apartment in 1943 following his death. He died penniless, basically, and lived in a hotel in New York in the last days of his life. So there's a whole story there about Tesla, which I'm not going to get into. Other people have done presentations about him. The chap that is more interesting in some ways in relation to anti-gravity is Thomas Townsend Brown. Now he never obtained a degree, so he didn't go through a mainstream university, but he did do a lot of experimental physics, and he spent time studying at several schools, including Caltech, Kenyon College, and Denison University. He's been called a physicist by some people, but I really think he was an electrical engineer. More than anything else, that was what he did. He served in the US Navy in the 1930s at the Naval Research Laboratory, funnily enough. So already you're getting the military connection in this. As I mentioned, Project Winterhaven, he was involved in that. And that was a research proposal to build an anti-gravity craft based on the work of Townsend Brown that he'd already completed in the years prior to that, starting in about 1920. Much of his work still seems to be kept under wraps, and his family keep a low public profile. I've got a letter written by him in 1985 where he basically says, somebody was writing to him asking about his research, and he said, can't really tell you much about it because a company have licensed it, so I'm not going to tell you anything. That's also all on the internet as well, of course. But the key thing that he did was he demonstrated that there seemed to be a link between gravity and electricity. He worked with Dr. Paul Biefeld, a friend of Albert Einstein, director of Schweitzer Observatory in Denison, Ohio. In 1923, they started to experiment with what are called gravitators. They found interaction between electric charge and the force of gravity. Separate to his study of physics, Townsend founded NICAP, which some people might have heard of, which is the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. And in 1956, this was set up to serve as a clearinghouse and a listening post for information regarding saucer sightings and evidence. So he was interested in the UFO phenomenon, Townsend Brown was. And he served sometime as director of NICAP, as did Major Donald Kehoe. Some very interesting videos of Major Kehoe on YouTube that have been posted not too long ago. So what Townsend Brown worked on was electrogravitics. And there are some films of some of his experiments. And in the 1950s, he worked at the Barnson Lab. And this was a letter. I've got an extract from this letter that I mentioned on the last slide. I'd forgotten to put it on this slide. In a response to a letter written in 1982, not 1985, Townsend Brown wrote, "I regret to advise you that the electrogravitic research has been taken over in its entirety by a Californian corporation which has imposed secrecy, at least until their investigations are completed." And this is one of the key things, which isn't really spoken of that much. It's not so much government cover-up as corporate cover-up. It's much easier to keep secrets within corporations than it is within government because there's less accountability. And when the government gives vast sums of money to private corporations, and you're going to see the results of that and what that causes to happen. And it's very, very grave, and most people probably haven't heard of it, and you will hear of it today. But going back to the actual effect that was behind Townsend Brown's work, it was originally discovered when they were working on high-voltage X-ray tubes. They moved excessively when turned on and off. As some of you may know, to generate X-rays, you need at least 25 kilovolts. Once you go up above that voltage, you start to get X-rays coming out of your equipment when you get the electrons accelerating and hitting a target of some kind. But then when they were switching these things on and off, they were noticing they were jittering about more than they should be. So we're going to come back to that. Now, Nick Cook wrote a very important book in about year 2000. I've got a video clip from his documentary as well called The Hunt for Zero Point. Recommend everyone try and get hold of a copy of this. You probably get it for a couple of quid off Amazon now, second hand. Now, he's a former editor of Jay's Defence Weekly, and he became intrigued when somebody sent him an article about anti-gravity research, and I believe he was given
A man named T. Townsend Brown was busy on experiments that defied conventional understanding about electricity, gravitation, and propulsion. Along with Drs. Paul Byfield and Agnew Bonson, Brown took high voltage to the next extreme. In this rare home movie, the earliest experiments in electrogravitics are recorded. By using high voltages over 20,000 and up to 200,000 volts, Brown discovered that highly charged capacitors would exhibit a noticeable thrust in one direction. Although awarded a patent for his electrokinetic generator, no one has ever reproduced his experiment until recently.
So we're going to come back to that. Now, Nick Cook wrote a very important book in about year 2000. I've got a video clip from his documentary as well called The Hunt for Zero Point. Recommend everyone try and get hold of a copy of this. You probably get it for a couple of quid off Amazon now, second hand. Now, he's a former editor of Jay's Defence Weekly, and he became intrigued when somebody sent him an article about anti-gravity research, and I believe he was given a copy of the Project Winterhaven document. I think that's what he says in his book, if I recall correctly. It's a few years since I read this book. Now, he tried to follow up a contact, George S. Trimble, whom he had worked in the field of anti-gravity research in the 50s. Trimble initially agreed to be interviewed about his work, but then he withdrew suddenly. Reportedly, he was scared. So in other words, Nick Cook became suspicious when this guy would no longer speak. Now, Cook continued his research quietly over 10 years and journeyed some way into the black world of defence research during World War II. So he went to look at what the Nazis was doing. I've got a clip of him here talking about the Nazi research.
But I was aided by a Polish researcher who had heard that I was interested in this area, and he got in contact with me and said that there was this guy had been researching German secret weapons technology in Poland, modern-day Poland, but southwest Poland today was Lower Silesia of Germany in the Second World War.
Right.
And he had uncovered a rat run of underground complexes where the Germans were working on some very advanced stuff. And one of them, he felt, fitted the bill for an anti-gravity experiment. It took place in a mine the experiment took place in a deep mine in Poland and consisted of this device called the bell, which was rotated at very high speed, and when rotated, gave off this kind of ionization-type glow. And
Like a plasma, you mean?
yeah, it was described like a kind of a bluish, purplish kind of glow, like a plasma-type glow, but it's really described as a sort of an ionization-type effect. But this experiment, no one knew, or at least this researcher, Witkowski, this chap who was helping me, he didn't know what this experiment was about. But he'd taken it apart based on court testimony that was given to the Polish courts in a war trial, in a war crimes trial. And it very much appeared as if this was an experiment to distort space and time. When you distort space and time, you start to get weird and wonderful phenomena pop out of the environment, as I know John Hutchinson will tell you. And this was clearly some very early experiments done by the Germans in 1945 to try and generate some kind of anti-gravitational.
So this would have been the Wenceslaw mine?
Yeah, absolutely. The experiment was known as the Bell. The device was known as the Bell, but it was in this Wenceslaw mine in southwest Poland today. Yeah, and I visited the site.
So we'll come back to that a little bit later on if we get time. But I want to show you some simple anti-gravity experiments that you can do yourself if you've got the right equipment. And this was done by somebody called Jean-Louis Naudin. Very simple experiment.
Here it is a high voltage power supply set to deliver about 10 kilovolts. Here you have a high sensitive electromagnetic balance, and the voltage is sent through the balance to this E-shaped card. This experiment is based on the Alexander Solov's device. Now, I send the high voltage to the electromagnetic device. You will notice that the system shows a way loss during the high voltage on the system. Now, I switch off the high voltage and the capacitor remains charged. And during the discharge, you will notice that the balance gets refined. It's equilibrium at the end of the experiment.
So you see there, very simple experiment. That's a close-up of the apparatus. I realise the video clip was low quality and poor audio and everything like that. But you see the effect. This is never talked about. Voltage affecting weight. To me, that is proved. This is electricity changing, or electrical charge, changing the mass of an object. Or the weight, I should say, not the mass. Which are different. So this is a detailed diagram. You can go onto Jean Naudin's website, jlnlabs.org, and you can download the details. It's got various versions of this. The other one, I won't show this clip. It's basically the same experiment, but some people claim it's what's called ion wind. The debunkers will say it's an ion wind effect, and that's what's causing the weight loss. But here he does it, in fact, explain while I'm talking, so that's handy. I didn't have to start it. That's in a plastic bag. So how can you have the ion wind operating through a plastic bag? I'll leave you to make your own judgments. Yeah, ion wind, I've just mentioned that. Lifter,
Hi,
this is a logical extension.
This is the test number 2 of the Lifter Maximus 2. Now, I switch on the power supply.
Electricity turned directly into thrust. Ah, now then. Now we get really interested in the Hutchinson effect. Oh, yes. This is the name given to what appeared in the video. Oh, in fact, I haven't shown the video clip because, yeah, I haven't had a chance, but we're going to see it again shortly anyway, so I don't need to. Now, I'll go back to Nick Cook again. In his research into the anti-gravity stuff in the hunt for 0 point, he was told by Boyd Bushman, I think I've got a clip of him later, we might see if we've got time, to go and see John Hutchinson in Canada. And this documentary was aired in 1999. Now, I'm just, again, wary of time. Now, he should take a trip to Vancouver. Hutchinson can produce levitation effects with between 75 watts and 1.5 kilowatts of power. And in 2008, I'll show you this clip later, he reproduced this levitation effect as a part of a challenge to him by somebody that I'm familiar with. One of the other effects that's seen with John Hutchinson's experiments, he's got 500 pounds of metal samples, 500 pounds. Even Dennis Kucinich, the US congressman, or whatever he is, he's got a sample of the material. You can see in the bottom of the pitch here, we're going to see some more rather disturbing examples of what this can cause later on. I'll probably skip over the clip of John, but I've got all these, as I say, on various things. Let's see if... okay, go on to the next one. So I'll just play a bit of this audio clip.
At the time, and I was invited by Germany and Austria to go over there and study the Hutchinson effect with all the lab equipment. So when I was not in my lab, these tests were done, and this is really getting into it. How can you say it, George? A very involved kind of X-File kind of thing, because the lab was then seized by the feds. And this is when I was in Germany, and they tried to keep it secret, but it made the front page of the Vancouver Sun newspapers.
They seized it?
They seized the lab. It was destined for Germany, paid for by Germany and Austria. And all the shipping and packing and the crates and that of everything. But, however, unfortunately, the Canadian government literally walked over a BC Supreme Court order and took the lab and tried to actually hide it under the Alex Fraser Bridge, but trying to be very secretive about it. But the newspapers found out about the whole thing and presented it on front page news.
So John Hutchinson's lab was seized in 1990 by the Canadian government. Why would they want to do that? Well, we're going to find that out later. Last year, I don't know if anybody who came last year, I mentioned this chap, Wilbert Smith, Canadian radio engineer, had degrees in physics and engineering. He did an experiment which he spent several years developing with a high-speed rotating disc. And he basically said that he thought that gravity wasn't gravity, it was an effect of motional magnetic fields. Now, it seems very unlikely that with the experiments that Smith did, because he became superintendent of radio regulations for the Canadian Department of Transport in the late 50s. He's a very good experimental scientist. He wouldn't mess this up. He measured a 1% loss in the weight of things that he did with his experiment. Yeah, and I put this slide in more recently. I'll just get this chap up, Podkletnov. In 2002, Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer, of course, approached Eugene Podkletnov to work with them on further research into blocking gravity. I think this was Project GRASP, I think it was called. He was also doing experiments with a force beam. A lot of the information is decidedly sketchy. It seems that, again, this seemed to sort of go underground. I'm not sure where Podkletnov is now. Not much has been heard of him, I think, since 2004. Ning Li, she worked at the University of Alabama. She's also seems to have disappeared, sort of, or gone off the radar screen. I've got a clip of Podkletnov. Again, the audio quality is not great, but we'll give it a go.
You'd mentioned in one of your papers a 20-pound or approximately 20-pound beam of force, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
That's been capturing a lot of interest lately. You know, the media was initially interested in the rotating superconductor, and eventually it ran its course, at least in the American media, and they weren't sure where to go with it. But, you know, the second experiment didn't quite grab the media in the same way, and I think the reason was they just weren't really prepared for it, they weren't looking for it, but the results were much more profound. Instead of a 2% reduction in weight, you would actually notice a beam of force that was knocking over things in the lab, right?
Yes, so we are in fact discussing two types of experiments that I made during the last 10 years. The first experiment was with high-speed rotating ceramic discs made of superconductors. And at extremely high rotations, I mean the speed close to 30 or 40,000 rotations per minute and even higher, we can get the reduction of weight up to 9%, and in some cases even more, but this process becomes uncontrollable, so it's difficult to deal with it. So it's one experiment, and the other experiment, which was called gravity impulse generator, this is also a special superconducting material which is put into magnetic field, and then we have a high voltage discharge of several million volts, and then we can create a wave in the space. The properties of these waves are very close to gravity waves, so we are practically sure that it is the same thing as gravity, and these impulses can be forwarded to any direction in space, and they are able to push different objects on their way of propagation. So if we speak about the detailed mechanism of these events, we are still working on it.
So you get the idea of that. Again, high voltage, rotating superconductors, same type of sort of things that are used in the experiments. Now I'm going to switch to something completely different. Coral Castle, which only a few people seem to have heard of. It's become a bit more known about it since I first put this presentation together. And I've got a news clip about it. I tried to get a better one for this talk today, but I couldn't find a better one. I've got an older news clip. I don't know when it was filmed. It's very low quality, I'm afraid, but hopefully you'll get the gist of it. It's basically Coral Castle. I think this was probably built using some type of anti-gravity levitation technique that Edward Leeds Scarning actually knew the secret of. He built this in secret, and it's a huge place for one man to have built anyway.
I'm Todd Tongan, and tonight the 10 Taxi heads to Homestead and the Coral Castle. This South Florida tourist attraction not only wows visitors, but some age-old documents may provide some clues to a more efficient alternative energy source. The story's just ahead.
Hey, the 10 Taxi is back from vacation, and he actually, Todd Tongan that is, found a South Florida man who is studying the Coral Castle in South Miami-Dade, but not for the reasons you might think.
Todd Tongan took a trip to the castle today, and he's live in Miami with more. And Todd, what does this man hope to find out?
Well, a lot of things, actually. He's hoping to find out, first of all, how he built the Coral Castle, which is still a mystery, but also the man that built it studied some very interesting and unusual things. The 10 Taxi's a real gas guzzler, so anytime you're talking about a more efficient alternative energy source, we're interested. Homestead's Coral Castle is an engineering marvel that has been compared to Stonehenge and the Great Pyramids of Egypt. The 80-year-old castle took over 25 years to build, and all of it, all 1,100 tons of coral rock, was carved and created by one small man. Edward Leedskalnin was a Latvian immigrant who built it as a monument to lost love, and he built it in complete secrecy. So how did just one man move all this coral rock by himself? Well, for modern-day engineers, it's still somewhat of a mystery, but one South Florida man thinks this door to the past could unlock an alternative energy source for the future. When Edward Leedskalnin died, they found many of the tools he invented to build Coral Castle, but they also found copper wire, rudimentary generators, and assorted writings from the genius. You see, he was fascinated with the study of electromagnetic energy. Carlos Doles has spent the last 10 years studying and experimenting with Leedskalnin's theories. He even reproduced one of the genius's inventions.
This device he called the perpetual motion holder. Essentially, this is a large electromagnet.
Now, an electromagnetic generator is nothing new today, but 80 years ago it was quite innovative. And even today, Leedskalnin's device is considered a very unique design. By placing the coil on the radius of the wheel instead of the hub, he created faster RPMs, and in turn, more power. History's mystery of the Coral Castle may never be solved, but thanks to the man that built it, you never know. A future energy crisis could be. Now, Mr. Doles thinks that maybe Leedskalnin even used magnets to move some of that coral rock. Just how, he's not sure. As far as that generator is concerned, it could be used in a wind generator almost immediately. And so far, there are no patents on file that look anything like Leedskalnin's invention. Interesting. Todd Tongan, Channel 10, Eyewitness News.
So again, electricity and magnetism involved. You can download Leedskalnin's book or notes, or whatever you want to call it, about magnetic current. It's available on various websites such as KeelyNet and whatnot. I've also got an article out there in a little booklet which summarises the story of Coral Castle. And that's somewhere you can go. You know, you can get on a plane, fly over there. It's like $12 to get in. Go and look around the place and see how you think it's possible that one man built it in secrecy. Black projects. Now, some people dismiss the idea that anti-gravity technology is being researched by US defence companies or the Air Force. But again, with Nick Cook's work, you can see, according to Boyd Bushman, who worked for Lockheed Martin, this is not the case.
Perhaps the person who took me closest to believing in things I'd normally have thought were impossible was Boyd Bushman. He is a senior scientist for Lockheed Martin, the world's biggest defence contractor. In the quest for breakthroughs in aircraft propulsion, it was Bushman's job to think beyond the frontiers of what is known and understood. Doing what he did, I strongly suspected that he lived on the fringes of the black world. Perhaps nervous of what he could and couldn't say, he certainly seemed to talk in riddles.
I believe that nature does not speak English. What nature tells us is what must be honored. It has been talking to us in many domains, and we have data sets that we're still trying to understand. But I can't talk to all the theoreticians because there don't exist theories where I am. What we have is wonderful, and it comes from miracles occurring. But that we will see will not be what we have. And I therefore tell my team, if you know anything, I really don't want to talk to you, because everything we know is already gone to production. Now, if there's something you kind of wonder, or if you think of, or etc., let's take those steps to the future. And that's what we always have to do, is walk literally. Kind of a lonely walk, but a very, very rewarding walk, to listen where languages are not taught and verbalization is not used. but we have to learn its language.
I felt he was trying to tell me something he wasn't allowed to talk about. So I asked him about the holy grail of science fiction, anti-gravity propulsion.
I do notice in recent publications that one of the latest group of my colleagues have said that they have evidence because of the separation of the galaxies that there is an anti-gravity. I went back to some of the first work on gravity done by Galileo, and he climbed his Leaning Tower of Pisa and dropped 2 stones. They arrived at the ground at the same time. I climbed my Leaning Tower of Building 500 here at the company, and I dropped my 2 weights that were exactly the same weight, and they did not arrive at the ground at the same time. I had purposely placed opposing magnets that didn't like each other, like 2 norths together, and I had already done an iron filing test that showed that it was showering out an entire magnetic plane, and I wanted to see how that magnetic plane interfaced with gravity.
He showed me a film of extraordinary experiments that had been done in Canada 10 years ago. A scientist there appeared to have found a way of getting objects to defy gravity by beaming different energy waves at them. Most people had written it off as a conjuring trick, but Bushman took it seriously and was trying to develop his own techniques.
I'm refining and heading towards something that all you have to do is charge, and it is lifting up. It is losing weight. When we complete the technology, it should fly.
So again, charging things up, things flying, you know. So the next place to look for evidence of anti-gravity technology being a reality is in black projects. And stories about this have been around for years, as you know. So let's have a look at some of the people who are involved. Over the last 50 years, there have been repeated stories and claims that the US has developed advanced craft which seem to mimic some of the behaviour of the craft flown by the people topside, as I like to call them. People like Bob Lazar are fairly well known in the field for these claims. While Stanton Friedman does not believe Lazar's claims, it is interesting to hear Boyd Bushman's opinion, and I'll play that in a moment. Bushman actually does give Lazar some credit.
Barry and I worked closely together. Now this is also the first time that my supervisor left me alone with Barry, and you know, this is where the learning process essentially began. These craft are not extraterrestrial. The scope, the aim of our project is now to back engineer these craft, or this one particular craft, with the intention of duplicating it, or duplicating the subsystems within it using earthly materials. So that was the project.
Were you told that you were going to be working on one specific area of back engineering, or were you going
only?
To... Only?
Yeah,
really, only?
Power and propulsion system, and everything else was essentially off limits.
Meaning you couldn't even touch it?
No, I couldn't touch it. However, I did get to go on the craft one time, and this was for the express purpose of only seeing the placement of the reactor and how the gravity amplifiers worked, how the emitters moved freely underneath on the primary level, and just how all the subcomponents, you know, fit together. In the room, this is a lab off the main hallway, okay. And in the room is one of the reactors from one of the crafts and one of the amplifiers from one of the crafts also.
How big are these?
The reactor, I would imagine, is about 2 feet, somewhere, but 18 inches, 2 feet, somewhere in that general area. Odd-looking thing. Has a bottom plate and then half of a sphere on top of it. The amplifier itself is about 2 feet in diameter, probably 4 feet long, cylindrical shaped, with something that would look like plates on the outside of it, black in color. These are very unusual, and essentially hollow, very, very unusual looking devices. This isn't actually the amplifier that I always catch myself calling it that. It's the emitter. It's the device that is moved on a pivot, and it's where the gravity wave actually is or emanates from. Quite similar to a horn on a microwave system.
Did collectively investigate everything that Bob Lazar went, but not by calling Bob or going through the process. I'm accustomed on the inside of the military that with the high levels of security that I've had, of realizing at least every time we were doing an investigation that we knew would be top secret or above, we always had what we called the story, which is what we were really doing, and then we had the cover story, which was in the event that anyone talked to us, what could we tell? What could we tell them that we were doing? And Bob Lazar's stuff fits beautifully as a cover story. As a story, it stinks, but as a cover story, it's fantastic. And they indeed, the items that we identified by independent investigation were that his description regarding his work assignment was absolutely proper. That they allowed to be part of the cover story because they knew that we would be able to verify that. His description regarding element 115 being a potentially stable element was allowed to be part of the cover story. And there turns out to be a zone around 115 that we've known for years, 50 years at least, that there is a stable plateau that points down to the large elements. And about 114 to 118 is good. And it was interesting to me that as soon as Bob Lazar did his thing, in order to have a new element, you have to spend about $6 million, I should say, $6 billion to $1 billion. And as at the when Bob Lazar leaked his information, or I should say gave the cover story for his information, we only had on the chemical chart element 109. The United States, because people had positive enough reaction to Bob's stuff, the political people permitted a great deal of money to be expended in the United States, and they also gave a great deal, and I'm talking about larger than billions of dollars, to the CERN collider as well as on into Russia. Between Russia, CERN, and us, we now have on your periodic tables up to element 118. Now it's interesting to me that they said that they got something around 118 to 116 to be semi-stable, and but in the not the chemical chart, but in the physics chart of elements, you'll find that there are whole batches of isotopes. I suspect that the individuals found there to be several isotopes which are stable and usable, and I would suspect that they're probably busy with stable isotopes today, conducting further experiments, which are obviously not going to be released because that's part of the story, not the cover story. The cover story is released, not the story.
Absolutely. Well, it's always good to hear some reinforcing evidence for the Lazar story. That's one of the classics for not only anti-gravity.
Bob acted perfectly proper for a person that is working on a cover story. I've had to use cover stories many times in my life as well, and he's noticed that he had no contact with anyone that has, or the standard UFO people. You know, like there are plenty of people that have published books about contacting Captain so-and-so as he brought his UFO across the sky. And all of those things exist. Bob Lazar contacted none of them. I think that they were fishing to try to get some of us to add some more understanding to their information, breaking through to the story. But I nor any of my friends decided to give them a call. And you understand who the great them are.
Yeah, well, to switch...
They're also supporting Bob quite well, by the way. Well, they made it so his reputation is kind of lousy, but very frankly, he's eating quite well.
Yeah.
You know, that would also be within what I call a cover story break.
Another person who has talked about anti-gravity craft being reality is Disclosure Project witness Mark McCandlish. He testifies to knowledge of ARVs through his friend Brad Sorensen, who has seen these vehicles displayed at a secret air show which took place, I believe, in the early 1990s at an Air Force base. Perhaps less well known is a chap called Edgar Fouché. He had a top-secret crypto clearance and worked as an engineering program manager and site manager for the US Department of Defense contractors involved in classified development between 1987 and 1995. So this is much more recent sort of stuff. Again, seems to have pretty much disappeared. You don't hear much from him now. I've got a clip of him coming up later if we get a chance to play it. But let's see, yeah. Edgar Fouché, now I came across his story on the internet in about 2004, and he worked in Area 51, let's see if I've got this yet, secretly being driven to an unknown desert location to work on crypto equipment in which he was an expert. But he knew this was somewhere near Groom Lake, in other words Area 51, where secret aircraft such as the F-117 stealth fighter were tested. He states that in the late 1970s, when he had to fix some equipment, he came across and inspected a module labelled Direct Orbital Code Link, which contained advanced electronics, much more advanced than was normally available at that time. And the meaning of this was later confirmed in conversations about satellite communications. He states he overheard conversations while working there about something called quasi-crystals, which were enabling technology for communications and propulsion. Now, let me just see if I'll flash this. I read this and I thought, quasi-crystals, you know, come on, you know, you're just making it up. Well, no, he wasn't making it up, because if this will come up in a moment, I don't know if this is going to come up, but it was basically, here it comes, I don't know if this page is still there, there you go, California Institute of Technology, Condensed Matter Physics, quasi-crystals, introduction. So there you go. He wasn't making it up. Let's see, he describes various other projects, SONSIV, SR-75, SR-74, Space Orbit Nuclear, Space Intercept Vehicle, SONSIV, various things he describes. But the most interesting thing he describes is this thing, the TR-3B. And as I say, I've got a clip of him talking about this, and this was actually, I found this in a videotape that I had from 1999, Riddle of the Skies, Channel 4 documentary. Let's see. Operational model of the TR-3B, 600 feet across. Let's see if it's got the... yeah, it's one of Fouché's associates states he saw the TR-3B at Papoose, part of Area 51, hovered silently in the same position for some 10 minutes, and before gently settling vertically onto the tarmac. Times a corona of silver blue light glowed around the circumference of the massive TR-3B. That's what his witness told him. But what intrigued me as well was he gives some of the operational details. The propulsion system was magnetic field disruption, which has been reverse engineered, he was told. Mercury-based plasma, pressurised at 250,000 atmospheres and at a temperature of 150 Kelvin, that's minus 123 centigrade, and rotated, there you go, 50,000 RPM. This reduces the weight of the centre of the craft by about 89%, and increases the manoeuvrability by 89% as well. And he said that that research had been going on since at least 1955. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is the Bushman clip I just showed, where he talked about putting the two opposing magnets together and dropping them. I have a friend in Washington who was told that story by his father in about 1955, the exact same story about putting opposing magnets together. So that effect was known about in 1955, and my father's friend had 40 PhDs working for him.
In the old Indian text, Sanskrit text, the Vimanas are always powered.
I've got a clip about that. Yeah, Mercury and Vimanas. I've actually got a clip about that. Yeah, it's come up for 3 times from completely different areas of research. Yeah, thank you, Nick. So we've been through a lot of stuff very quickly. I rather like this though. Somebody sent me an equation once when I was discussing this with somebody a few years ago, with somebody by email. That's what I think is one of the things that happened. One of the things that's happened. Let's see how we're for time. This is quite a long clip. I've got about 6 minutes of clip here, so it's going to be a bit long, I think. I'll play a bit of it, as soon as Nick brought it up.
This is what really is startling, is that in 1908, the Royal Library of Baroda, which is in central India, they were going through a bunch of the old manuscripts in there, and some of them were 2,000 years old, and they found a book, and that book is called the Vaimanika Shastra, and it was written by a guy named Maharishi Bharadwaja, and he wrote this 2,000 years ago, and he said right in his book that he was compiling this from earlier books that were many, many thousands of years older than this, and that this book, the Vaimanika Shastra, was an entire book, George, that was all about Vimanas.
Wow.
So here was a book that wasn't just passingly mentioning these aerial ships of ancient India, but was just all about it in great detail. And in fact, it said that there were 4 types of Vimana, the Rukma Vimana, the Tripura Vimana, the Shakuna Vimana, and there was the Sandara Vimana was the 4th one. Some of these Vimanas, as they were described, had wings and were apparently like an airplane. Others were long cigar-shaped Zeppelin-type craft. Another type was apparently kind of like a helicopter. And the 4th type of Vimana was a discoid flying saucer-type craft. And all 4 are described in detail. They talk about metals. They even talk about electricity. One of the things that is talked about in the Vaimanika Shastra about these ancient craft is that they use mercury, which is a strange thing. And this is what Bill Clendenin, in the beginning of my book, Atlantis and the Power System of the Gods, was deciphering. And I have to really give him credit for this, where he was fascinated, like myself, in the whole thing of Vimanas, the Vaimanika Shastra. I mean, could we make sense out of what they were saying in this ancient book? And many people, this book is famous, and it's discussed not just in my books, but in all kinds of books about, UFOs and mysteries of the past, because this thing is, it's baffling. What Bill came up with was that Mercury is really an amazing element. Mercury it's a metal, it's a conductor, it is an element. There's things you can do with mercury that you just can't do with other metals and elements. And one of the things you can do is make what Bill called mercury plasma gyros.
These are the Sudeten Mountains on the Polish-Czech border. During World War II, this beautiful valley was home to some of the finest scientific minds of the Third Reich. It was here that the Nazis built one of their underground research facilities, the Wenceslas mine. A vast underground complex hidden away from Allied bombs, which Nazi slave labor carved out of the Sudeten Mountains.
Example of a surface infrastructure being kind of a reflection of the underground facility, which was...
It was here, in the desperate last months of the war, that German scientists worked around the clock to produce Kriegsscheiden, the war-winning technology that might produce a stunning knockout blow, even as the Nazis were being pushed back towards Germany.
We're now deep into the mountain.
Not hundreds of meters, but several kilometers, in fact.
This is several kilometers into the mountain.
Yes.
And this would have been a highly secure, impenetrable assembly site.
Exactly, and the secrecy around this place was very exceptional, so that the Allies never found out about it.
But the Allies did capture one man who knew all about this place, and he wasn't a token find. His name was SS General Jakob Sporenberg, and he was in charge of the technical program at the mine. What he revealed astonished his interrogators. Indeed, I find it astonishing 60 years later. He spoke of a secret experiment attempting nothing less than to conquer gravity. He described a bell-shaped device that needed enormous amounts of electrical power. It was made of a hard, heavy metal and filled with a mercury-like substance that was violet in color and glowed when under test. People who worked on the bell suffered from sleep problems and severe vertigo. 5 of the 7 scientists died while working on the project. In a memo to Hitler, the scientists wrote, "It is in our opinion that the scientific results ascertained from our experiments with the bell are truly decisive for the war." Experiments with the bell happened deep underground in the mine, but directly above it, on the surface, was this strange structure. Called the flytrap, it first showed up on an Allied aerial reconnaissance photo in 1944. Igor Witkowski believes that the flytrap was a test rig for advanced propulsion technology. In other words, flying saucers.
There is a extremely strong and thick steel reinforcement of the pillars, which means that it was to withstand some great forces working on it.
How did it work? We don't know exactly, but we do know from Sporenberg's evidence that the bell was a revolutionary device, and the flytrap, designed as its test rig, was fed with underground cables running to the heart of the structure. Is it possible that the UFO sightings over Nazi Germany were related to this quest?
There is a sense here that the Germans were engaged in very highly classified work, and that possibly they were engaged in anti-gravity type programs.
What I do know is that many of these bizarre projects like the bell did not remain in German hands. At the end of the war, they were plundered secretly by the American High Command and taken to the States.
There are rumors that the Aurora project is responsible for many UFO sightings in the vicinity of Area 51. Ball-shaped craft and strange hovering lights. There are those who believe that Aurora has produced a revolutionary breakthrough in advanced technology. Edgar Fouché thinks he knows what it is.
To me, the most fascinating vehicle from the Aurora program has been the TR-3B. It's a triangular-shaped vehicle. It uses a circular accelerator, as you imagine a circle within a triangle, that rotates a mercury-based plasma at 60,000 revolutions per minute, pressurized at 250,000 atmospheres, and supercooled to 150 degrees Kelvin. I absolutely believe that all the triangular-shaped vehicles that have been spotted belong to the U.S. government. The only thing that could outmaneuver a TR-3B would be the things we copied it from, which would be alien vehicles.
There is no evidence that his TR-3B aircraft exists. Except that in recent years, unidentified triangular craft with a pulsating light in the center have been seen in various locations around the world.
You have my word, whatever it's worth, that I trust my friends. I believe what I've seen, what they've seen and told me. And I believe this technology exists. I'm absolutely convinced.
A couple more sightings. I've got a video here from Staffordshire.
Video or photographic evidence, apart, of course, from the Bell.
That's from 2002. Another thing to look at, John Leonard Walton, his videos, Far Above Space and Time. Check those out. What are they? What the hell are they? Very good question. Nobody seems to have any answers. I think this might be another one. I'm going to play a very brief clip of this.
But the results were just amazing. And after watching this story, I will present you the results. He recorded the object almost for 3 minutes, very close. The object affected 2 transformers in the area that were burned. They had to be changed. His cellular phone stopped working. He had physical problems with his memory. He was affected very much. You can see the black dots there. They are not there. It's the tape. The tape was affected. The energy was very, very strong. Sometimes these objects are dangerous. Dangerous because they have this energy around them.
And Mauricio Ruiz managed to fix the camera twice because the camera wanted to shut down. He was very concerned and tried to fix down and continue filming.
I believe this is one of the best videos that have ever been taken here in the U.S. And I can tell you, I can put my hand on fire for this video. This video is absolutely real. And the object produced magnetism. And this, I have the analysis with the logo of the University of Mexico to prove it. After the university realized what they have done, they called me and said, we want equal time in TV to say that it's not an extraterrestrial object. And I said, well, I never said that. I said that we found magnetism. And they couldn't prove, they wanted to to discredit their own investigation. Can you believe that? They want to discredit the scientists who did it. It's true. They didn't know what to do. But they had the rope in their neck. Thank you. Now, let's listen this incredible, funny man, incredible man. He worked with the police in Houston, in the Alvin area. He's a very honest man, very clean, very nice family. There is no reason not to believe in this incredible story.
Early in the morning, about 7:15, 7:20 at the latest that I could recall, on that particular day, April 11th, 2008, I normally come over from upstairs straight to my kitchen. I try to get something here for my dogs. That I have 2 dogs, and I like to feed them something all the time. And right now I'm just grabbing anything. But what I do, I come in and I get something for my dog, so I'm going to go feed him. I come outside early in the morning. Most of the people already went to work. And I bring my dogs. Here, Chewy. Come on. Good boy. I feed my dogs every morning. Come out here to the yard. Here, Chewy. Come on, get some more. Good dog. Here. Spiky. Yeah, and as I'm feeding my dogs right here. Here. Good doggy. Come and get it. You're a good doggy. I was feeding my dogs right here. And all of a sudden, as I'm turning towards, the horizon, towards the house and the pine tree, I noticed something that's something's out of the ordinary, like a speck of something dark. And I focused myself, and I said, I kind of, I looked at it for a while, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. So what I did, I ran inside to my house. I had the camera, my video camera, sitting there by the TV. And I grabbed it real quick, because I had used it on Easter Sunday with my family. And I let it sit right there for a while. So what I did, I brought the camera, and the dog, Chuito here, he was here, as well as the other dog. And when I noticed the object, I grabbed my camera immediately. And I started to videotape from that angle. But he was growling. He was like, and I just petted him, but I couldn't talk. I didn't know what to say. I was just speechless, like they say. So what came to my mind, videotape. Keep the camera going. So I'm out here, and I'm videotaping, and I'm trying to hold on to the dog. And when I noticed the object moved, either my hand shaked a little bit, and I felt some sensation, something, but I was just too shocked. I didn't know what was going on. But that thing really didn't look like a plane or anything. It looked something like round, and it had something at the bottom that kind of shined, but I couldn't tell. So I got my camera, and I zoomed in. That's when I noticed the top part was either going around, it looked like, and then at one time, he did this. But when he did that, my camera captured it, but something happened. I couldn't keep going. And then the object, what he did, it went up, and then it stopped, and then it went like this, and then it went up, and came all the way up. That's when I tried to close in. And when I noticed that the object didn't take off, no, it just glided away, like a kite. It just glided away towards the horizon. And I just couldn't understand it. I looked at my camera, took it inside, And that's when I said, wow, I got it on tape. But at first I didn't think I got it on tape because the camera don't show it. That's funny. I said, oh. And you have to put it on pause, and it comes out, the picture, the video. But if you let it go play, you won't see it. And then all of a sudden when it stops, you could film it. You could actually videotape it. I mean, this incident here, I don't know what happened. I'm not used to this. If people say, we saw the video, but where's your voice? Say something. Well, I'll be honest. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. Even the dogs were not saying. They normally bark like whoa, whoa. This time they were just like trying to bark, but they couldn't. I had the same thing. I was just telling in my mind, quiet, quiet. That thing, like if it was just sending a signal to me, like don't move, don't say anything, just watch. And I had that little feeling, you know. Now, that's probably me. But you know what? I don't see that every day. So the only thing that I did, get the camera, videotape. The sky that morning had a little bit of fog and a little bit of mist. They called dew, early morning dew. So I just got the camera. I couldn't focus that good. I could only zoom in because of my finger on top, you know. But I couldn't, you know, focus everything. So the way the video turned out was, you know, the object and the sky, no clouds that morning. It was just kind of foggy. So it scared me. I mean, I was scared. I was surprised. And I said, I might as well just call Jaime, because I heard about Jaime. He always comes out like, this happened here, this happened there. I said, if Jaime could have something to match it up and say, I have it, okay? That's why I say, Jaime, come over, take this video with you. I'm going to give him the cassette tape. I mean, he could have it. I don't want it because every time I see it, it throws me off. I mean, I just don't feel the same. Now, I'm a retired person. I retired from the government. And I don't want to play around. I don't want to come out and say, hey, it's me, it's a fake. No, if it's a fake, I'll just tell Jaime, don't waste your time. Stay home. I'll send it to you. No, I want him to come over here. I want him to film because I believe that Jaime will provide real evidence, whether from me, whether maybe somebody else is going to have a better video. And then Jaime is going to say, it all started from Alvin on down. This could be the beginning of the new wave of close encounters where we could videotape them. And don't be scared, because if you're scared like me at first, you say, no, I don't want to do nothing. Leave it alone. No, give it to Jaime. Believe me, if Jaime knows how to deal with it, you will deal with it like me. Thanks to Jaime and his staff, I feel confident. And like I said, he's in.
Thank you. We found a second object with the same characteristics from April 24, 1993 in Mexico, in Ocotlan, Jalisco. 40 pictures by Raúl Domínguez. These are some of the best pictures. Probably you remember this object. It's a classical case now in the UFO phenomenon. And if you do this, if you turn around the object from Alvin, it's just the same. I believe both objects are very, very close to each other. Probably the same object or from the same group of intelligent beings. I don't know. But then, well, this picture was taken in 1995 by Mr. Bartlett in Guadalajara. This is a new highway. Where was a new highway, and then he got this photograph. He saw the object, and he was able to take this incredible photograph. And it's very similar. We believe it's the same object. And now, just a couple of weeks ago, I went to a television program in Guadalajara, and Daniel Monraz, a friend of mine, presented this video from 2002. And amazingly, seems to be the same object. Then we have at least 4, the evidence, and 3 more that support these kind of objects, 3 different witnesses, or 4, as a matter of fact. Now, this is the analysis that was made in the university. This is the chemist Miguel Ángel Canseco and my collaborator Rodolfo Garrido. And I think this is the first a tape has been tested this way. Sometimes we test the image, we don't test the physics on the tape, because there is no reason to do that. But in this case, with the magnetism inside, it was very important to do this.
Can you
raise up the volume
of the video so we can hear
because we
the
have
audio?
to listen what they have to say. And the audio...
Doctor Canseco, ¿cómo está usted? Muy buenos días.
Buenos días.
Bueno, parece ser que ya concluyó usted con sus investigaciones.
Sí, el estudio.
Creo que ya tiene ahí los estudios.
Sí,
Platíquenos, ¿qué encontró, doctor?
A ver, se hicieron 3 estudios. Uno que se llama microscopía de fuerza atómica, que lo que se hace es, se estudia la topología, la morfología de la superficie a nivel atómico.
O sea, va siguiendo la cinta una especie de cono.
Un cono, una punta, hace una topografía, un escaneo en una área de la superficie de la cinta y se analiza o se determina la rugosidad, la topografía y la respuesta magnética en este caso.
Muy bien, ¿y qué es lo que encontró cuando usted hizo esa inspección?
Bueno. A ver, nosotros probamos la cinta en una parte dañada.
Lo mostramos.
Y se observa, esta es una cinta, la cinta en la parte no dañada.
No dañada.
Se ve la topografía homogénea en la superficie.
Vemos que hay una uniformidad en todo lo que son los dominios.
Los dominios, sí, la altura de los picos, esta es la altura que tiene la intensidad de la señal. Esta es la cinta en la parte dañada.
La que está a la izquierda.
Exactamente.
Esta es la dañada y aquí vemos irregularidades en los dominios.
Sí.
Y aquí vemos más uniformidad.
Sí, aquí se ven pequeñas perforaciones.
Esta irregularidad, doctor, ¿a qué la atribuye usted, de acuerdo a su peritaje?
A un campo magnético externo, pero de acción muy rápida, para que dañara únicamente una sección de la cinta, no totalmente la cinta.
¿De qué campo, qué magnitud estamos hablando?
A ver, están hablando del orden de entre 8, aquí lo indiqué, entre 8 y 10.000 teslas.
¿Teslas? Esto es...
no, perdón, Gauss.
Son Gauss, perfecto.
Gauss.
¿Estos campos se encuentran normales en la naturaleza o se tuvo que acercar o exponer a un dispositivo específico?
Se acercó a un dispositivo específico, sí.
Correcto.
Sí.
O sea, no hay duda, solamente la única forma de explicarlo.
La única forma de explicarlo, sí. Pero además, muy rápido, ¿no? Sí.
O sea, ¿quiere decir que la fuente que se emitió fue una fuente rápida o cómo? No entiendo.
Sí, o que hay un campo magnético intenso de esta magnitud que pasa la cinta, no se pasa rápidamente y ya.
De acuerdo. Pues, y esa es la característica, la huella característica que se encuentra en sus estudios.
Exactamente, sí. Estas son fotografías iguales, con una amplificación mayor. Entonces,
estamos hablando de la cinta que es normal.
Esa es la cinta normal.
No dañada.
Ajá.
Y esa es la cinta dañada.
Dañada, exactamente.
La irregularidad de los dominios y la presencia de estos especie de insuficiencia de dominios nos habla del daño.
Sí, de valles y crestas, y aquí hay una separación mayor que en este caso. Esa es la parte tridimensional del estudio.
Correcto. ¿Y este estudio de acá, estas imágenes, doctor?
Estas son las mismas imágenes, pero en plano. Con lo que yo veo es únicamente la superficie del material sin meterme a la topografía.
¿Corrobora lo que usted nos está indicando?
Exactamente, sí. Pues aquí lo que se observa es, otra vez, los dominios magnéticos homogéneos en la zona de la película no dañada, y esa es la zona de la película dañada, entonces ya se ve una diferencia muy grande.
¿Y cuál es el dictamen que usted tiene de la diferencia de estas dos?
El efecto de un campo magnético externo sobre la cinta.
¿Sobre la cinta dañada?
La cinta en la zona dañada.
¿La zona dañada?
Sí.
Pero no nada más hizo usted un estudio desde el punto de vista de microscopía de fuerza atómica. Tengo entendido que también utilizó otros sistemas que creo corroboraron su observación.
Exactamente, sí. Se hizo un estudio de la isometría. La isometría es una técnica que nos permite medir varias cosas. La importante en este caso es el índice de refracción de la superficie de la cinta, de la superficie magnética de la cinta, con respecto a la energía de incidencia de un rayo, y lo que me genera es esto, me dice cómo cambia el índice de refracción de la muestra y cómo es la homogeneidad de la superficie en esa zona.
have then proof, scientific proof to this case. Probably for the first time. With this, the scientists cannot say there is nothing to be analyzed, there is nothing to study. Here they have this tape, they have this case, and there is nothing they can do about that.
Okay, so the next section I'd like to look at is possible hints of new technology which appear to have come out of NASA. One of the things which happened last year on 28th of March 2004, NASA announced a successful test flight of a ramjet or scramjet engine which propelled the vehicle to Mach 7. And I think this has even been superseded to, I think, Mach 8 or Mach 9 this year, 2005. Though this isn't an anti-gravity device or propulsion engine, it does make me wonder what is still classified. I mean, this is a pretty advanced type of jet engine, but some people say this is 30-year-old technology. So what have they been working on since? The other thing which people seem to reject is the idea of a link between gravity and magnetism. Now, in the physics that I was taught, there was no real relationship between gravity and magnetism as such. But a recent NASA science story, which came out just over a year, well, nearly a year ago, talks about a new probe to test for gravitomagnetism. And here's the story. And this is the Gravity Probe B, which has left the Earth to measure a subtle yet long-sought force of nature, it says here. And this was a probe which was launched on April 20, 2004 to try and find this supposed link between gravity and magnetism, to find out the curvature of space-time, whether it can be affected by magnetism and this sort of thing. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the hints of new technologies which were released right under our noses in February 2004.
I recall in your study one of the things, and you hinted at it, of an enabling technology for the Mars mission was this nuclear thermal propulsion.
Yes, sir.
And it seemed like I recalled, and you said something about 240 days if you do chemical and 100 days or less if you do nuclear thermal propulsion. And the other piece of that was the significant savings in cost to do the mission. Billions of dollars, as I recall from that study. Do I recall correctly?
You're correct. And the fact, for those, you can take a look at these curves. Those are all verified. Those are all run by JPL for us over a period of 6 months, simulation and modeling. And the darker ones, the blue ones, are the nuclear thermal. And with just a slight increase in mass down there on the nuclear thermal, you can cut the transit time from 240 days even down to 130. Mm-hmm. And then if you have any electrical power propulsion there for ion propulsion, you can really cut it down to about 60 days. Now this drastically reduces your gross liftoff weight, which directly relates to cost and staging and everything else, Mr. Chairman. Mm-hmm. And yes.
Okay. It's interesting, just an observation. Anytime this country, and I know this in DOD, and you do as well, wants something really badly and fast, we take it out of the normal acquisition cycle.
Yes, sir.
We specialize, and it says something about the acquisition system. Means if we don't want something fast and needed, we'll put it in there. You know, so it's a little bit. It's kind of backwards. It sounds like.
In the video there, he mentioned nuclear thermal propulsion. But Edgar Fouché spoke of nuclear thermal propulsion in 1998, which is when he gave his talks in which he described the TR-3B. So something's going on here. And there's some further comments which came from the Moon to Mars briefings as well, which I found quite interesting.
One observation, one question. I'm struck by your list of supporting technologies as I look at it. I put my previous hat on, responsible for all the Air Force research and development and technology, including the space stuff. With the exception of the EVA suit, everything that you list there are technologies that other agencies, in this case particularly the Air Force, are developing to some extent or another. And I think it reinforces that notion for leveraging technologies and leveraging agencies to make sure they're working together, because every one of these in some form or another is being touched upon, and there are dollars associated with it, and from the Air Force and I'm sure many other organizations also. So that leveraging aspect is very, very important. The question, you talked about management and NASA management, et cetera, and you mentioned a couple of different areas. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at, but I'd be interested, or the Commissioner would be very interested, if you could give us your comments, if not today, but in the future, about the reorganization NASA is currently making within the headquarters to address some of the things that you talked about. Thinking particularly of Code T, their new exploratory systems, sort of a Air Force Systems Command-like organization to be responsible for addressing some of the concerns that you've expressed in your study. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it and give us your thoughts today, certainly we'd be interested in when you can get back to us.
Well, General Lyles, what I'd like to do is to come back with you. I know just briefly, and I'm all in favor that they have Admiral Craig Steidel, who has got a lot of acquisition experience. He's bringing people in there with him, and we're more like the CODEM writes the requirements, and the other people do the acquisition development, just like the Systems Command did. I think it's a wonderful way to go, but I only know just some of the primary details, and I'd be glad to look into it and come back and report to the Commission. I think it's but also this National Program Office I mentioned would pull all together, because the Air Force does have a lot of technology.
Thanks, Tom.
And the quote there was, the Air Force does have a lot of technology. And that was what Tom Stafford actually said in that clip. So what's the Air Force doing developing technology to go into space? I thought that was NASA's job. This video was then deleted a few months later. What's happened to the renewed space program? Nothing. It's been killed. So I've got a couple of clips of that. Let's see. I've got to skip through this now. If this is real, why the secrecy? What does it mean for us? Well, it means free energy for everyone. Freedom for everyone has the technology. Complete freedom. But it also, the thing is, folks, I'm sorry to have to break this to you, but it's been weaponized. This technology has been weaponized already, and it's been used as well. This is something nobody wants to talk about. People here this weekend, you won't hear them talking about this. I've had to write a book about this. That's the remains of one of the World Trade Center towers, 70 columns of unsupported steel turning to dust. Someone wants to explain to me where these buildings went. This building here is building number 7, destroyed at 5:20 in the evening on 9/11. So this is what was left of the World Trade Center. So here you can see the comparison. Where did 500,000 tons of steel and concrete go in 20 seconds? This is what the technology, which involves anti-gravity technology, can do, and what it did do. It can turn cars upside down in New York.
South Tower came down. I was across the street, and I picked up the camera just out of habit. And something in the back of my mind said, run, run, run. And never in 20 years of shooting in New York have I run from an assignment. But something in the back of my head just said, run. And as I hit the corner of Liberty Street, it was almost being picked up by a tornado, almost being picked up by a wave. It was like being picked up by the black cloud. That black cloud had substance. It was like night, but it had a solid feel to it. It was like gravel, hot gravel, and just picked me up and tossed me about a block. At one second I was running, and the next second I was airborne. And I lost my glasses, I lost my cell phone, I lost my pager, but managed to hold on to both cameras. But it threw you for a block? I was back down at Ground Zero last week, and walked the area where I have a pretty good recollection of where I was and where I wound up, and it was just under a city block.
There was this blast of warm air. It wasn't hot. It was warm. And it picked me up and threw me up against the wall of the building that was...
You were picked up off the ground?
Physically picked up off the ground.
I remember an explosion. At that point, I got knocked out. I don't remember anything. Then I got up, and I looked out the window because the windows exploded, and the street below caved in.
Here's a clip from 2008 from John Hutchison. John Hutchison submitted an affidavit for Dr. Judy Wood's science fraud case, which was covered up, not reported by anyone, wasn't even reported by the alternative knowledge community when I tried to get them to report it. Got weird fires, which were seen in this boat experiment of John Hutchison, seen at the World Trade Center. So we now know the class of technology that was used to destroy the World Trade Center. It's very similar to what's called the Hudson effect, which is based on field interference. I've got whole DVDs about this. These are John Hutchison metal samples on the left. This is from the World Trade Center on the right. I don't think we've got time to go into the crop circle connection, but there is a crop circle connection as well. I've got to leave it there because we're just about to time now, 10:15. I've done it in an hour, which is far too quick. So you have to consider the evidence that I've shown you, what to make of it. Is it all a load of rubbish? Are all these UFOs just people mistakenly seeing things? Or are all the videos fake? Why have people tried to cover up the connection of the Hutchison effect to 9/11, which has been clearly documented by Dr. Judy Wood, who is a former professor of materials engineering science and mechanical engineering? You've got to consider all that evidence for yourself. Just close with a quote from Thomas Townsend Brown, which is more related to the extraterrestrial side of things. He said, he made an analogy of a person looking at UFOs and ET craft to a fish looking up at the bottom of a passing ship. That fish looks up at the strange thing in its sky. It may have different properties, maybe size, prop wash or turbulence. Some fish will scatter and never look again. Some fish will wonder, but none of them will really know what that form represents, in other words, the boat. They will never know about other things that man is capable of other than sailing across that particular part of the ocean. We, in many ways, are those fish, and the lights we see in our skies are the hulls of those ships. So that's some of the websites that I've used. Not very readable on there because of the colours used, but I've got more information outside. So that's basically it for today, and I hope you'll think about that very, very carefully. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was absolutely fascinating. And I know that I'm going to echo all of the speakers here today when I say that obviously I know for many of you, the information you hear is just a starting point, but you are encouraged to go away and do your own research and make up your own minds about the information that's being presented. We're now going to take a 15-minute